Chapter 23 of Mary Barton. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Chapter 23. The Subpoena. And must it then depend on this poor eye and this unsteady hand, whether the bark that bears all my treasured hope and love shall find a passage through these frowning rocks to some fair port where peace and safety smile, or whether it shall blindly dash against them and miserably sink? Heaven be my help, and clear my eye, and nerve my trembling hand. The Constant Woman. Her heart beating, her head full of ideas which required time and solitude to be reduced into order, Mary hurried home. She was like one who finds a jewel, of which he cannot all at once ascertain the value, but who hides his treasure until some quiet hour when he may ponder over the capabilities its possession unfolds. She was like one who discovers the silken clue which guides to some bower of bliss, and secure of the power within his grasp, has to wait for a time before he may thread the labyrinth. But no jewel, no bower of bliss, was ever so precious to miser or lover, as was the belief which now pervaded Mary's mind that Jem's innocence might be proved without involving any suspicion of that other, that dear one, so dear, although so criminal, on whose part in this cruel business she dared not dwell even in thought. For if she did, there arose the awful question: if all went against Jem, the innocent, if judge and jury gave the verdict forth which had the looming gallows in the rear, what ought she to do, possessed of her terrible knowledge? Surely not to inculpate her father, and yet, she almost prayed for the blessed unconsciousness of death or madness, rather than that awful question should have to be answered by her. But now a way seemed opening yet more clear. She was thankful she had thought of the alibi, and yet more thankful to have so easily obtained the clue to Jem's whereabouts that miserable night. The bright light that her new hope threw over all seemed also to make her thankful for the early time appointed for the trial. It would be easy to catch Will Wilson on his return from the Isle of Man, which he had planned should be on the Monday, and on the Tuesday all would be made clear. All that she dared to wish to be made clear. She had still to collect her thoughts and freshen her memory enough to arrange how to meet with Will, for to the chances of a letter she would not trust, to find out his lodgings when in Liverpool, to try and remember the name of the ship in which he was to sail, and the more she considered these points, the more difficulty she found there would be in ascertaining these minor but important facts. For you are aware that Alice, whose memory was clear and strong on all points in which her heart was interested, was lying in a manner senseless; that Jane Wilson was, to use her own words, so expressive to a Lancashire ear, dazed, that is to say, bewildered, lost in the confusion of terrifying and distressing thoughts, incapable of concentrating her mind, and at the best of times Will's proceedings were a matter of little importance to her, or so she pretended. She was so jealous of aught which distracted attention from her pearl of price, her only son Jem. So Mary felt hopeless of obtaining any intelligence of the sailor's arrangements from her. Then should she apply to Jem himself? No, she knew him too well. She felt how thoroughly he must ere now have had it in his power to exculpate himself at another's expense, and his tacit refusal so to do had assured her of what she had never doubted, that the murderer was safe from any impeachment of his. But then neither would he consent, she feared, to any steps which might tend to prove himself innocent. At any rate, she could not consult him. He was removed to Kirkdale, and time pressed. Already it was Saturday at noon. And even if she could have gone to him, I believe she would not. She longed to do all herself, to be his liberator, his deliverer, to win him life, though she might never regain his lost love by her own exertions. No! How could she see him to discuss a subject in which both knew who was the blood-stained man, and yet whose name might not be breathed by either, so dearly, with all his faults, his sins, was he loved by both? All at once, when she had ceased to try and remember, the name of Will's ship flashed across her mind, the John Cropper. He had named it, she had been sure, all along. He had named it in his conversation with her that fatal Thursday evening. She repeated it over and over again, through a nervous dread of again forgetting it. The John Cropper. And then, as if she were rousing herself out of some strange stupor, she bethought herself of Margaret. Who so likely as Margaret to treasure every little particular respecting Will, now Alice was dead to all the stirring purposes of life? She had gone thus far in her process of thought, when a neighbour stepped in, she with whom they had usually deposited the house key, when both Mary and her father were absent from home, and who consequently took upon herself to answer all inquiries, and receive all messages which any friends might make or leave, on finding the house shut up. "Here's something for you, Mary. A policeman left it." A bit of parchment. Many people have a dread of those mysterious pieces of parchment. I am one. Mary was another. Her heart misgave her as she took it, and looked at the unusual appearance of the writing, which, though legible enough, conveyed no idea to her, or rather her mind shut itself up against receiving any idea, which after all was rather a proof that she had some suspicion of the meaning that awaited her. "What is it?" asked she, in a voice from which all the pith and marrow seemed extracted. "Nay, how should I know? Policeman said he'd call again towards evening, and see if you'd getten it. He were loath to leave it, though I telled him who I was, and all about my keeping the key, and taking messages." "What is it about?" asked Mary again, in the same hoarse, feeble voice, and turning it over in her fingers, as if she dreaded to inform herself of its meaning. "Well, you can read every word of writing, and I cannot, so it's queer I should have to tell you. But my master says it's a summons for you to bear witness against James Wilson at the trial at Liverpool Assize." "God pity me!" said Mary faintly, as white as a sheet. "Nay, wench, never take on so. What you can say will go little way either to help or to hinder, for folk say he's certain to be hung, and sure enough, it was t'other one as was your sweetheart." Mary was beyond any pang this speech would have given at another time. Her thoughts were all busy picturing to herself the terrible occasion of their next meeting. Not as lovers meet should they meet. "Well," said the neighbour, seeing no use in remaining with one who noticed her words or her presence so little, "thou'lt tell policeman thou'st getten his precious bit of paper. He seemed to think I should be keeping it for mysel. He's the first as has ever misdoubted me about giving messages or notes. Good day." She left the house, but Mary did not know it. She sat still with the parchment in her hand. All at once she started up. She would take it to Job Legh, and ask him to tell her the true meaning, for it could not be that. So she went and choked out her words of inquiry. "It's a subpoena," he replied, turning the parchment over with the air of a connoisseur, for Job loved hard words and lawyer-like forms, and even esteemed himself slightly qualified for a lawyer, from the smattering of knowledge he had picked up from an odd volume of Blackstone that he had once purchased at a bookstall. "A subpoena? What is that?" gasped Mary, still in suspense. Job was struck with her voice, her changed, miserable voice, and peered at her countenance from over his spectacles. "Oh, a subpoena is neither more nor less than this, my dear. It's a summonsing you to attend and answer such questions as may be asked of you regarding the trial of James Wilson for the murder of Henry Carson. That's the long and short of it, only more elegantly put for the benefit of them who knows how to value the gift of language. I have been a witness before time myself. There's nothing much to be afeared on. If they are impudent, why, just you be impudent, and give 'em tit for tat." "Nothing much to be afeared on," echoed Mary, but in such a different tone. "Ay, poor wench, I see how it is. It'll go hard with thee a bit, I dare say, but keep up thy heart. You cannot have much to tell 'em that can